Where do you get your identity? Identity is such a personal thing that sometimes we don't think about it for everyone. We think about it for ourselves. When we get dressed, we think about our identity. Laughs at me when I pick the same shirt every Sunday. But I like that shirt. That's my identity. We do it in our clothing. We have identity in clothing. Some of us have identity accompaniments, other things. The car you drive is part of your identity, especially for guys, right? You talk to an old guy like me, he'll tell you the first car he had, and that was his complete 16-year-old identity. It was all about that. Our wonderful musicians that play here, man, part of your identity is you play. You worship God with that. Our language is our identity. My mama was from East Texas, and when she made a round thing that pecans on top, it was a pie. Could you not tell she was from East Texas when she said pie? Your language reveals your identity. Your family reveals your identity. I have a complete physical identity as the father. We're men. And I have bared the scars of raising 4 men. Luckily, I have a wonderful wife who has us going straight. That's individual and family identity. We also have a corporate identity. Anything you do together, you gain an identity from. Nationalism is in the news, and it's kind of a passé identity. But for many people growing up, when I grew up in the 50s, you said the pledge and you gained a corporate identity of being an American. And being a naturalized citizen like I am, it was even more special. I had a new country to identify with. People identify with their religion. Sometimes it causes blessing. Sometimes it causes strife. We identify with education. 2 of my boys have a gold ring on their hand from Texas A&M. And they're Aggies. And I didn't know what was going to happen to them when I sent them down there with my money. But they gained an identity as Aggies. And they got a couple of good jobs from it, too. So those guys stick together. They have an identity. We gain identity from the way we look physically. We ask to stand up 3 times. It's hard to be 5'8" in a 6-foot world. You have identity. I have identity. On the inside, I want to be slim. But then when Greg drives his Bluebell truck by, I don't want to be slim that much. Because my internal identity and my external identity don't match. Oh, there's a word for that. You know, when your internal and external identities don't match, here's a college word. Cognitive dissonance. When you hold 2 conflicting thoughts at the same time. And that causes us to squirm when we hold 2 conflicting thoughts. I'm sure none of you have ever approached voting like that. That's cognitive dissonance. Wanting to be thin, liking tacos. That's cognitive dissonance. Well, I want to talk about the people of Israel. And the answer to the test goes on the screen. As a good teacher, I want you to have the answer to the test before we do the questions. That way you won't be worrying about what the answer is while I'm talking. I want you to think about what we're studying. You know, one of the things that's been bothering me about my personal identity is I'm getting old. Spunky and I were sitting around at a men's group. We got there early because we're old and retired and we have time. We were sitting around talking and asked him how he liked retirement. And Spunky said, I don't like to admit I'm retired. And man, I got it. And what I told him was, you know what? When I tell people I'm retired, I immediately say, but I have a part-time job. I still have some identity, not just what I used to have. That was part of my cognitive dissonance of trying to go from being a wage earner to, I'm living on your money now. Having to deal with my cognitive dissonance. I had to deal with it the other day in my wife's classroom. I took her lunch. She's got all these little kids running around at Sam Houston Elementary. And they come out of the classroom as I'm coming up the hallway with a bag of food, Chick-fil-A. I know how to please my wife, Chick-fil-A. And the kids came out, and I tried to mess with them like I always do, and they walked past me. And as they walked past me, one of them said, "Was that your father?" Okay, more cognitive dissonance. This is getting older. I'm having to deal with it. Our corporate identity here at Benchmark is what we do together. And the cognitive dissonance here is from what we think we are to what we really are. And here's 10 things that give us our corporate identity. Number 1, prayer leads the way. The better we do on praying for everything we do, the better we do. But what if we don't do prayer very well? Then everyone sees that. It creates dissonance. All teaching is biblical and practical. The better we do that, we're seen one way. If we fail at that, we're seen another. Our ministry to children and teens, how critical. How well do we do it? Or do we have some loopholes? Sharing our faith with others about Jesus, how well do we do it? When do we miss an opportunity? Small groups. I think we heard about small groups. Sharing, praying, serving, leading. How well do we do it? How well do we show love to each other? And how well do we show love outside of Benchmark? Part of our identity. I knew I'd mix these pages up. I just knew I would, and I did. So. How well we represent our community. Do we represent the people we live around? Race, economics, social view? Are we part of our community, or are we aloof, distant, different? The gospel, is it central to everything we say and do here? That's a good point. Are people using their talents to glorify Christ? And number 10, do we have a humble, godly leader who is encouraged by people and has people around him that can tell him no? All those are so important to our godly identity as Benchmark because we act out our identity in everything we do. And when it gets tough, when you get in a bind, you know what you do with your identity? You fall backwards. In Exodus 16:3, they speak to the people of Israel in a bind. They've been led out of Egypt miraculously, and they were all there for it. They didn't sleep through it. But now all of a sudden they're grumbling, and they say, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. They wanted to go backwards. I have a little story about going backwards. My boys played ball at Denton High School. They were all Broncos, and we all bled purple and still got half a closet full of Bronco Pride shirts. And one time, one of my boys, who was he was a sophomore, and it was near the end of the game, and we were beating the high school from across town. And normally you don't notice when the coach calls a kid off the bench to talk to him, but when it's your kid, you notice. And Coach Fisher had my kid right up like this, and he was talking to him. And then he put my kid in, the third string quarterback. We were on the 2-yard line, our 2-yard line. And he got a play off and gained a couple of yards and was like, oh, okay. After the game, I said, Josh, what did Coach say to you? He said, don't go backwards. Don't go backwards. When you're in that point of strife or struggle, don't go backwards. And what did the people of Israel? They weren't even the people of Israel yet. They were wanting to be formed into a nation, and they wanted to go backwards. They wanted to be Egyptian slaves because for the past 400 years, what had they been? Egyptian slaves. That's all they knew, and that's all they knew how to do. The same thing happens when we get into any kind of rehab or therapy. If you try to do a rehab, people want to go back when they get under stress. So one of the ways God wanted to mold his people, you look at the 10 Commandments as the 10 laws of God. We've always been taught that. That is true. That is perfect. That is right. I just want to shine a little light from over here that there was something else he accomplished by giving them the 10 Commandments. There was some other reason to have the 10 Commandments other than just obedience. Not just. Obedience is wonderful. But one of the first things he told them was, don't covet. In Exodus 20:17, it's how God molded them into the identity of his people. And I'll start with 17. He said, don't covet. Why? Don't be like the Egyptians. You've spent 400 years with the Egyptians. Don't be like them. He said, don't lie. Why? You've just spent 400 years with a lying culture that held you captive. And that's what you know, but I'm leading you in another direction. So don't lie. Don't steal. You've just spent 400 years with your life stolen in bondage to other people. You don't do that. You're not an Egyptian. Don't be adulterous. You're not an Egyptian. You're my people. Don't murder. Why? Oh, yeah, it's wrong, but he's also trying to show them, you're not like where you've been. You're not those people. You are my people. Don't murder. Here's one that just was, for all of the cultures of that time, there were other lists of 10. There were other lists. The Ur of Namu was written 2,000 years before the 10 Commandments, and it had don't steal and don't kill. So other cultures had lists of rules, but nobody had this one. Nobody had honor your father and mother. Father and mother. Cultures were usually one or the other. And no culture had remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. The idea of worship for being a slave and being Egyptian was you did a specific thing. You sprinkled water, you ate a certain food, you dressed a certain way, the priest shaved all the hair off their body. I'm halfway there. And that's how they worshiped. They did a thing. No, what he wanted was so much more glorious. He wanted us to commit our mind and our time in the Sabbath to him. That was a brand new idea in worship, that you would commit your mind and your time to him. I'm old enough to remember blue laws. Anybody else? Yeah, you remember blue laws. That was a way of imposing Christian principles on the general public. Well, the imposition now is in our heart. Do we want to honor him? Do we want to give him our time every morning to read and worship and pray? We can honor the Sabbath. That was a brand new idea, to set apart evil. Not idols and not evilness. The next one, don't take the name of your Lord your God in vain. They came from a group of people that for 400 years they had over 1,500 gods. The Egyptians worshipped 1,500 different things. They worshipped the scarab beetle. I used to see those in my uncle's feedlot, rolling up things that fell out of the back of the cows in the feedlot. Yeah, some of you are getting it, some of you aren't. You've never been in a feedlot. They worship those things that rolled that up. No. You don't call the name of a scarab beetle to worship. And you don't call my name for what you want. You call my name to love me. My name is precious. I've seen some pretty violent fights in 32 years as a school principal, and one of the most violent fights I ever saw was at the end of it when we pulled them apart. Why are you fighting? I told him not to put my mother's name in his mouth. He had just said the other boy's mother's name, but that was so offensive to him that they went down for it. It is offensive to our God to use his name in our mouth for things other than worship. It's a great idea. Do not make images. Do not make any image of God. This is the first of the sayings of God that he puts a penalty to. The others he didn't address a penalty. One, honor your father and mother, he addressed with a blessing. This is the first one with a penalty. And that penalty was that if you make idols of me, if you worship idols, the penalty is not just sin, it's iniquity. Sin is sin. Sin is missing God's mark. Sin is doing the wrong thing. And sin impacts you because you sin. Iniquity covers everybody. It's why they told you to drink upstream from the herd. Iniquity flows down to the fourth generation and impacts everyone. And that was when he mentioned, don't do iniquitous things. And the scripture doesn't point out exactly what they are, but they're commonly thought of to be putting your child to death, those kinds of things that people did to idols in the 400 years that they had been captive. They had seen it. Obedience and disobedience to God's laws, to God's speaking, all carry consequences. The slaves obeyed for one reason. They were afraid. There's some things I obey right now in my personal identity out of fear. I obey the IRS. I obey them out of fear. I don't love them. Show of hands. Anybody love the IRS? You know, not one hand went up. Are you worried about that? Not one hand. But you still obey them because we're supposed to. If you obey things out of your self-will because you think you should obey them, that's self-indulgence. Bluebell comes in single-serving sizes. We have them at my house. And I always only eat half of that single-serving size because, I'm not self-indulgent. I have my own rule for how I eat my Bluebell. Now, if you obey the rules of others and you do that well, you're self-righteous. And there's so many people that, they're really good at obeying other people's rules, and that builds with them self-righteousness. And what God wanted to build within his people was not self-sufficiency or self-worship or self-righteousness. He wanted them to love him. When you love him, it changes everything. When you love him, you can love others. One time I took a professional trip to Clark County, Nevada. You can't put Las Vegas on the paperwork. You can't write Las Vegas on the paperwork. It won't get through the head shed. So you go to Clark County, Nevada to a seminar. And this was a national seminar about girls bullying. I raised 4 guys. When they got mad at each other, it was simple. I didn't understand the depth and the power and the venom that girls could have with each other. I didn't get that. But I was seeing it at school. So we paid your money, tax money, to go to this 3-day seminar in Clark County, Nevada. We even rode our motorcycles out there to Clark County, Nevada, and went to the seminar. And I was just drained of energy listening to the speakers and the depth and the hurt they had from being bullied and being hurt by people's words and people's actions. And then they would come up with all these, and we need to do this to fix it, and we need to do this to fix it, and we need to do this. I told my assistant principal one afternoon, laying out by the pool, recuperating from a very difficult seminar. Hey, it was July. You know you're at a cheap seminar when you go to Clark County in July, because the good ones are in February. And education seminars are always in July because they're cheap. We were recuperating out by the pool. And we both had the same thought. He's a believer. Everything they prescribed to do in the lives of those girls to build them up, to empower them, and to help them took the place of just one thing. I am God's creation. I am worthwhile. I have purpose. I matter. Everything they tried to do, all these programs, all this other stuff, was to replace just that idea that I am a child of God and I matter. We thought, what these girls need is the Lord. They don't need a 12-step program. They need the Lord, because when you know that you are loved, you can project the love. But when you know you're not loved, you don't project love. You get on somebody and you get on them hard. When Pablo Picasso was in the final 20 years of his life, Picasso lived in a small town on the south coast of France. And while he was there, he wanted to remodel the interior of his chateau. Now, France is a socialist country. You can't touch the outside of your house without permission, but you can touch the inside. So he wanted some new cabinetry, and he told the people, send me a good carpenter. And they sent him a good carpenter, and the carpenter said, what do you want? So Picasso took a piece of paper. He drew, I want the cabinets here, I want the cabinets here, the cabinets here. Okay. The old carpenter looked at him. Picasso said, how much? How much for the cabinets? And Picasso said, just sign the paper. Just sign the paper. When the Creator takes control of the created, when the Creator claims the created, it has value. Without Picasso's name on there, it's a piece of paper. With his name on there, it's a masterpiece. Do you feel the name of your Creator written on your heart? If you do, and you know what to do about it, yeah. But if you're having some cognitive dissonance, you think you feel the name of your Creator in your heart, but you're not sure. That's a chance for you to talk to Chris or Bear or me or any of the elders, and let us help you understand what the signature of your Creator on your heart means and what true identity in Christ is. For that, the power of the cross, the message of the cross, is the answer. That is our identity.